welcome to the show. I'm Peter Whittle. Now, before I introduce my guests this week, just a few notices about next week's locals events. We've got two. There is one on Tuesday, that's May the 21st. That's in Sheffield. And then on Wednesday, we have one in Lincoln, Wednesday the 23rd. They're both in the evening. They're both entirely free. And I do hope that if you're in either of those places, you'll come along. Meet like-minded people. They're proving to be hugely popular. So the best thing you can do to find out the whys and wherefores and times and dates and details is to write to locals@newcultureforum.org.uk. So that's next week, and I hope to maybe see you there. Now, we've talked an awful lot on this channel, quite rightly, about cancel culture and how it is affecting almost every area of life now. But very pleased today to introduce you to, well, the latest high-profile victim, actually, because it happened to him this week. The writer Harry Saul Markham is with me. Thank you very much for coming in, Harry.
Pleasure.
And, you know, I'm not sort of, you know, you seem very upbeat and, you know, and not cast down by it. But essentially, what happened was that a book that was going to be published, your first book, it's going to be published, was essentially, well, the offer was withdrawn at the very last moment, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was really quite excited last Friday because I thought on Saturday I could sign the contract and my book would be published, as we discussed, we being the publisher and I, in the October, November of this year. Yeah. But as I was poised to sign, they decided to withdraw their offer due to fears around backlash. I mean, they worded it that the sensitive nature of the topics I address, namely multiculturalism, anti-Semitism, extremism, Islamism, democracy. I mean, these are very timely issues given what we have seen before and indeed since October 7th. But because I address those issues and I speak in ways which perhaps might upset some progressive sensibilities, they decided to withdraw.
But then they had been very encouraging, and up to that point...
Oh, up to that point, my gosh, they had sent me repeated emails encouraging me to sign. I mean, goodness me, I was the one that was being reluctant. If anything, I was, you know, trying to reiterate that this is a very sensitive time and whatever, and that I'm, you know, have various concerns, but they were encouraging me to sign, and I was about to. But I think that the reality is, today the pressure from various groups, right, that's the pressure that they mount upon publishing houses, politicians, journalists, is so enormous that it's inevitable now that such entities will cave in to the demands of such intimidation. Yeah. And this really frightens me. Yeah. Because the hallmark of liberal democracy, what is central and critical for any functioning liberal democracy, is the ability to challenge ideas, so long as you're rational, fair, considered in your arguments. It's paramount that we protect that right. Now, my work is a centrist reckoning with multiculturalism.
Now, the title of the book was
is The Delusion of Multiculturalism.
Delusion of Multiculturalism. Now, okay, you say this is done from a centrist viewpoint. Can you explain to me, because I genuinely always been mystified, how would you describe a centrist? I mean, if you are a centrist, what would that mean?
Well, it means that I'm in favour of maintaining multicultural societies.
Right.
But multicultural societies cannot function unless diversity is reconciled with that which we all share. Now, in my book, I emphasise the importance of centrists reclaiming debates around nationhood, culture, and the place, or perhaps the imperative of having a national identity which goes beyond just merely owning a passport. Yeah. And the failure to define, much less assert, a national identity, I submit, has led to not only these vast divisions we see in our society, but has enabled the extremism that my book is really concerned about. And I argue that we need to be able to not only have a grasp of policy, because I think there are major shortcomings when it comes to counter-extremism policies,
right,
but this is a matter which goes beyond policy. Right. This is fundamentally about culture and our own identity and our own values. And unless we have a reckoning with those things, any effort we make on the policy front, I think, will have a very limited effect.
The thing is, I mean, I disagree with you about multiculturalism, for example. I think that it was always doomed to failure, actually, and there are various reasons for it. But I think one of the interesting things that you say or as I understand it, obviously because the book has not been seen, is that there is now this sort of strange alliance between Islamists and, if you like, the left.
Yeah.
And would it be right to say that's...
Oh, yeah, but it's you see, this is where you had the chutzpah to challenge me, so I might challenge you. I think that the explosion of Islamist anti-Semitism, for example, post-October 7th, just take that as a case in point. I think years ago, your assessment would have been accurate, that it's actually encouraged and enabled by the far left. I think now it's enabled by my fellow centrists. I think that our liberal establishment, because of their own delusional thinking that you can cultivate a society in which we tolerate everyone and we have no boundaries to our tolerance. We have a boundless tolerance, if you will. And you think we can all live in peace and harmony. I think that delusion, hence the title, is responsible for this explosion of Islamist anti-Semitism. And of course, the issue of anti-Semitism, as ever, is about more than Jews. My late grandfather was a black taxi driver. Many Jews were black taxi drivers because they could be their own bosses. And when my grandfather, you say about the taxi trade that you could measure how well an economy was doing by how well the black cabbies were doing, right? I think today, and I think this is a fair assessment, you can measure how successful or how stable a liberal democracy is by the way its Jews are doing, right? And whenever you look at anti-Semitism, particularly the Islamist incarnation of anti-Semitism, it cannot be understood without recognizing its relationship to anti-democratic thinking, misogyny, homophobia, sexism. And this is why we have to be able as a society to remind ourselves that when Jews are in trouble, we're all in trouble.
I mean, when you talk about the Islamist anti-Semitism, been entirely on show over the past, since October 7th.
Yeah.
The thing is that the problem there is that you term it Islamist, but there have been polls that have shown that the one, which I spoke about myself on GB News, which have shown the level of anti-Semitism broadly in the Muslim community is far, far greater than in the mainstream. And to the point of something like 3/4 of them actually didn't think that Hamas had actually carried out those attacks. That's extraordinary, isn't it, Harry?
So this you've just highlighted a critical point. We need to stop seeing the issue of Islamism as a pariah issue. Chapter 2 of my work looks at precisely what you've just identified. And I think the term we need to be using now is Islamism beyond Islamists.
Right.
The idea that we have seen the normalization of Islamist thinking in swathes of our Muslim communities. And this is why Mehdi Hassan spoke about this issue as being, for the Muslim communities, this being our dirty little secret, that of anti-Semitism. The problem is it's the way of thinking now is extreme in its very nature. And so this is why we need to stop comparing Islamism to that of the far right. Because the far right, I mean, when I mean the far, I mean the genuine far right, not just people we disagree with, but the issue of the extreme right, because the Islamist stuff is much more, well, I think it's far more influential and it has far more subscribers in terms of, or adherents to its thinking. Whereas the far right ideology, I mean, for sure it's there, but it's really not a threat. And if I as a Jew had to write the top 10 concerns that the Jewish community have, that wouldn't go in that list. It's just not there. And I think it's when we speak of the far right and Islamism together, it's kind of a useful technique for liberals to kind of show how they're both extremes and that they're both pariah things in our societies. They're not.
Yes, yeah.
Right? One is a real major issue.
Yes.
And in terms of the way in which it makes ordinary members of our Muslim community cleave to extremist ideas around Jews, about democracy and other things. I mean, there's a lot of data out there. In my book, I reveal some of these alarming polls. And we need to recognize this as not a pariah issue, but now an issue that's becoming increasingly mainstream.
Actually, also, I think people have been shocked by this sort of splurge of anti-Semitism that they're seeing, not just in this country, but in the US.
Right.
Do you think that you being Jewish had any bearing on the publisher's decision, for example?
I don't know. I mean,
I suppose you're never going to know.
I'm never going to know. I mean, I look. I mean, I like to think that I suspect their decision was motivated by a genuine reluctance to get themselves into hot water.
Yeah.
I don't believe it had any kind of anti-Semitic motivation, because I see this. Because remember, this hasn't just happened to me. Plenty of people that have written, say, on the trans issue, for example, have also been cancelled.
Oh yes,
And so I see this as symptomatic of a liberalism which is suffering with a profound sense of not wanting to stand up for itself.
Yeah.
You know, David Cameron spoke in 2011 of a need to create a muscular liberalism. Well, maybe we do, but we need to create a liberalism which is not afraid to assert itself and establish boundaries, right? And if you don't do that, if you abandon your dissenting voices, if you let your dissenting voices be cancelled and silenced, and you allow orthodoxies to go unchallenged, then, I mean, that's a necessary precondition for totalitarianism. And that should disturb anybody. And I'm deeply troubled by what the publisher did. Not necessarily because they cancelled my book, but because it reminded me, or it exposed to me, the climate of our liberalism with trembling knees.
Well, the thing is that the publishing business is sort of one of the worst. I mean, it's entirely infected by wokery. It's always been left liberal, whatever. I don't know whether you call that centrist. And there are people do get a lot of trouble getting their books even published, even before the current circumstances we have. So I think it's a very difficult field now for authors. For example, we interviewed some time ago Lionel Shriver, and she was saying that, for example, in publishing, you've got the situation now where actually writers of fiction will they will just stay away from writing particular characters because, the whole orthodoxy is that you shouldn't write about anything that you don't know or that you're not, right? So she would say, well, in that case, that's the death of creativity then. I can't write about, I don't know, a black character, black male character because I'm a white woman, things like that. So it's pretty riven through the whole thing. You, though, you have seen a silver lining in this, haven't you? In the sense that, well, here we're talking about it. This is going to possibly help you, isn't it?
Without this, I'd never have met you. Oh, my gosh. I mean...
Stop it, please.
No, I mean, I'm serious. I think that this has really been a blessing in disguise. I went to bed on Friday night feeling miserable. Well, I go to bed like that most nights. Yeah. So I woke up feeling even more miserable. And I thought I'd just tweet about it, and it exploded. And the reality is this publishing house has really shot themselves in the foot. I believe that being cancelled is something which we should all wear as a badge of honour. And it wasn't just me who was cancelled. The foreword to my book is written by an Islamic sheikh, right, who wants to see change and wants to see us amplify the voices of those who are working to reconcile faith with liberal democratic values, right? And my view is that I want my book, whilst it does make some unpalatable observations about multiculturalism, I've even called it a delusion. I also am making my mother very happy by being optimistic, because I do think there is a place for optimism. But I have to be honest that so long as this liberalism with trembling knees, or this climate liberalism with trembling knees, continues and prevails, then not only will liberal voices be silenced, but the voices of those who are working for change will be silenced. And particularly when it comes to the issue of Islamism, if you just deal with it on a policy front and you have no ideological and you do not have any, or your societies do not amplify the voices that are working for ideological change, then you won't resolve the issue. I'll be honest, I'm feeling incredibly pessimistic about the future, particularly since October 7th.
Yeah.
I think we have a very serious crisis, and I think that if you look at basic demographic forecasts, if you don't get a grip of this issue, things will get worse. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to work that out. But are we to accept this and just ignore it? No, this is not only about Jews. This is about everything we hold dear in our society. And my grandparent, or two of my grandparents who served in the armed forces in this country, if they were to see what this country has become for their for their descendants, their children and grandchildren, I mean, they would be rolling in their graves. I love this country. I'm British to my core. I believe in it, and I believe, and I adore its diversity. But what I do not adore is the cowardice of liberals, not only leftists, but liberals, to reclaim the issues which now seem to be dominated by populists who do have, in some instances, anti-democratic tendencies. You only need to look at the continent to see what the future may well hold. And, if you're looking at the situation in France, for example, Marine Le Pen or Eric Zemmour, for instance, these are people who are filling a gap that liberals have left. And I want my fellow liberals to be able to re-engage with the issues that they for so long have ignored.
Yeah, I mean, just to be devil's advocate again a little bit, you could say ignored or simply have no answers to.
Well, I think that's true. I think at the moment there isn't a... See, populism is sexy, right? It has tremendous sex appeal. Liberals And liberalism isn't a particularly sexy thing because it places no real value on the things which bring people together. It has no notion of communitarianism, national identity, responsibility to your fellow citizen, even the notion of citizenship, it's completely abandoned. And populism is now talking about the things which really matter. And I want to see, if you will, a liberal populism. Right. A liberalism which is centrist, which is able to reconcile diversity with things we all share, which is able to just call out the woke nonsense for what it is, right? But at the same time, prevent our democracies prevent our democracies, or the future of our democracies, from being held, or I suppose, allowing populists to determine the future of our democracies. What I worry about, and any student of Orwell will tell you this, that in Animal Farm, Napoleon was very good in his early days, was the great revolutionary, as the liberator. But eventually, Napoleon became himself an oppressor. I fear that populism may be well-intentioned in the beginning, but I fear that the anti-democratic tendencies may well take over. And I, therefore, as a student of Orwell, subscribe to his view on revolution. I'm very cautious about where we are going as a society. And liberal democracies matter. And they matter because we fought for them and millions died for them. But they also matter because they are the guarantor of all our rights and liberties. And we need a liberalism which reclaims the things which millions of us hold dear.
Do you, you're still an undergraduate, aren't you? Isn't that
yeah,
right?
I'm just a 24-year-old boy chick.
Okay, right. Okay. Well, if you're still doing that, how long have you been into politics? I mean, is this...
Well, I saw you again when I was a pre-adolescent. Well, no, I was an adolescent. I was prepubescent when you were running to be mayor. I've been interested in politics for a long time, but I've always sort of had a propensity towards disrupting orthodoxies, and I began writing the book after I was caught up in a horrific anti-Semitic incident in London, in which around 15 of us almost got lynched by a very aggressive, violent, pro-Palestinian mob. And I just thought to myself, how could this happen on the streets of
Did this happen in the past 6 months?
No, it happened 3 years ago, and that's when I began writing the book, because I thought to myself, something has gone terribly wrong with multiculturalism. And I realised we have no boundaries to diversity. Diversity, we haven't really unleashed any of the real benefits that we could have from diverse societies. I mean, if you read Mill, diverse crowds are what you need, and diversity can come in many different forms. You want a diversity of ideas, you want a diversity of people, right? And a diversity of cultures. But we have to get past this idea that all cultures are of equal value. They're not, right? We cannot have a culture or embrace a culture which has no regard for Jews or for gay people or for women. We have to say there are some things which are unacceptable, right? And we're not going to tolerate it. And this is where liberalism needs to assert itself and say, we are more than prepared to embrace you and respect your right to be whoever you please, but we have boundaries here, and if you cross those boundaries, you can't stay.
Right. I mean, this is maybe this is a quandary for your average liberal. They won't take it on board because they won't win. I mean, they can't possibly, because if they think of all of those things being important, right? Gay rights, women's rights, of course, all these things, then they can't fit with a very, very, hard line, I would say, rather sort of medieval religion, in the case of Islam. I think it's impossible. I mean, when people sort of say to you, things like, well, we should respect all cultures and all religions. I think you should say, well, actually, why should I respect an ideology or a culture which thinks that I'm an abomination, for example? So, that's something. But I was wondering, if you say that you had this terrible incident of an attack, were you with friends at the time, or?
Yeah, I mean, they're mostly grandparents.
Right. No, but amongst your peers, so I'm trying to get at, what do they think of what you write and what you...
Right. Well, I have no friends.
Right, okay.
Aside from you. Most young people, I think, want to get on with their lives and be young and enjoy the frivolities and tomfoolery of youth. I enjoy that too, but I also like to write about society. But I think most young people, I mean, I had a particular incident at a lecture once on multiculturalism, and I raised the issue of the relationship between Islamism and Islam. Now, I'm of the view that there are Islams, just like there are Judaisms and Christianities, right? What I don't want to do is I don't want to, but inadvertently become the ally of Islamists, because Islamism is a totalitarian ideology which cleaves to the idea that there can only be one Islam. I am the ally of the sheikh that says there are pluralistic interpretations.
Right.
And that follows naturally from my liberal leanings. But I would say in the issue you've just raised, when I was in that lecture and I spoke about the relationship between Islamism and Islam, and I said, whilst Islam and Islamism are not synonymous, Islamism is a plausible interpretation of Islamist texts and literature. It just is, right? And
literal. It's a literal
translation. Right, indeed. Yeah. And someone got up and quite vociferously responded, you can't say that, this debate needs to end now, right? And this was at a very this debate happened in a very secular place, a place where we should encourage different ideas. Right. The lecturer agreed.
Yeah.
After the class had finished, this particular student chased me out, accusing me of being an Islamophobe, and all sorts of things, and said, for raising that particular issue, you're racist. And I responded to this charming student, but who incidentally is very white and from Surrey, no less, naturally. And this student's, I responded to this student, so as a student of Jewish history and as an Ashkenazi Jew that comes from Europe, I am more than prepared to make criticisms of the history of Christendom. Does that make me a Christianophobe? Of course it doesn't. Because criticising ideas is not the same thing as being a racist. When I was young in school, we had an anti-racist group that came in to talk to us about Charlie Hebdo and the front cover of Charlie Hebdo, which led to two vile, murderous Islamists going into the offices of this publication. And this publication today has offices hidden off. It's like a military bunker. Charlie Hebdo, make no mistake, is a leftist publication. Yeah. It's anti-racist to its core. But this anti-racist campaigner came in and sullied this publication by saying, for showing that caricature, that publication is racist. Now, me as a 14-year-old, and in my precocious way, I responded. I responded with enraged fury. I couldn't believe that someone would say that about a caricature which may not be nice, which may be offensive, but you diminish the enormity of that word by calling the mocking or ridiculing of religious ideas or prophets or whatever to be racist. Now, I personally, I that's not the way I engage with religious texts. I believe we should engage in religious texts in a much more intelligent and critical manner. But I will defend the right of others to go and do that, and I will absolutely call out fellow so-called liberals when they call the likes of Charlie Hebdo or other or anyone who makes criticisms of Islamism to be racist or Islamophobic. And that's the interesting thing about Islamophobia, because Islamophobia is a word which effectively is trying to make the criticism of ideas to be tantamount to an expression of racism.
Of course,
and that's its, and in some sense, that's its genius. Because if you can make an idea or a particular way of speaking, make society believe that way of speaking is racist, then you are going to prevent people from criticizing that idea, right?
Oh, well, it more than prevent. I mean, you can actually criminalize it. It's a sort of it's almost a de facto situation we have anyway now.
I would agree.
You know, in fact, the Islamophobia definition is actually getting narrower and narrower. I mean, there's a new one, which is the all-party definition of Islamophobia, which has been adopted by most of the political parties. And I mean, it's really narrows it right down. I just wonder, one thing before we finish, I wanted to ask, actually, is that one of the things that I find we've discussed on this channel a lot, very disturbing, is that the attitudes of people from about the age of 16 to 24, like young people, polling, and I'm asking you because of that story you just told me, is that essentially they don't really believe or even care much about free speech. That in fact, you know, to them, the idea of giving offence, or actually should I say taking offence, and supposed hate speech, that is far more important. They don't really care about free speech. Does that ring true to you amongst, you know, your peers and your,
you know, when you were a youth, I'm sure you're a jolly fun youth to be around, but your generation, my generation has a lot to thank you guys for, because it was your generation that took a lead in disrupting orthodoxies, which have allowed my generation to be so free, and of course generations before you. I think that young people today, and this is what I find scary, have become the allies, or indeed the perhaps even the enablers of totalitarian millenarian movement. Because this reluctance to give offence means that they have become indispensable for such extremist movements who want to prevent anyone from criticising them, be that on the side of militant trans, be that Islamism, or even some of aspects of the anti-racism movement. I think that young people and this and their relationship to being reluctant to give offence have become the best friends of such movements, because those movements now don't have a generation like yours to resist them, right? And I personally think that free speech isn't only sexy, right? I mean, it has some very sexy advocates, I'm sure, I know, but it's absolutely necessary. It's necessary to ensure that such totalitarian-minded movements are not able to grow. And I'm afraid to say, I think in no small part, the failure of young people to recognise why free speech matters, I think that in part has contributed to the growth of such extremist movements.
I think you're absolutely
right.
right.
I will just make one last comment here. What I really want to impress upon, though, is that when it comes to the Islamophobia issue, we need to be very careful between Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hate. Now, I actually am very scared by the rise of anti-Muslim hate. And I am scared about it because it means that ordinary Muslims are being targeted. The issue is that Islamophobia is a term which, firstly, as you rightly point out, isn't really defined. But secondly, it means that genuine instances of anti-Muslim harassment, racism or abuse, which is serious, goes unnoticed, or you diminish from the seriousness and gravitas of such acts. And I urge governments all over the world, particularly in the West, to make that distinction and do not lend Islamist forces credence by using this Islamophobia term. Use anti-Muslim hate, distinguish between criticism of ideas and acts of hatred against people, because they are very different things.
Well, that's one of the fights obviously we're having, and that is the basically, well, the general defense of being able to talk about ideas. I mean, it's one of those basic things you wouldn't even think we had to even discuss it anymore.
No.
But anyway, now, first of all, your book, right?
Yeah.
Have you got any publishers interested in it?
I have a few. I have several interested.
Okay.
And I am hoping to make some positive announcements very soon. So watch this space.
Well, Harry, look, thanks very much for coming on.
Thank
Very
you.
quite short notice, I would also say. So thank you very
Don't
much.
worry, thank you.
And I do hope you find you get this publisher.
Thank you.
And great. We shall publicise the book.
Thank you.
That's it for the show this week. In the meantime, do have a nice week, won't you? And we shall see you next time. Thank you. Bye. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.